everyone, and thanks for tuning in to EarthFest and Earth Week. I'm Ami, the host of PBS Wisconsin Education's new show, Field Notes on Climate.
And I'm Kylie Kump. I'm the series producer.
And super big science nerd. In each episode, we focus on a climate issue, a problem arising from our changing climate, and then what we can do about it. And how do we do this? By talking to the people who are conducting research, experiencing these things in their jobs, in their areas, and just having an impact on our communities, both now and in the future.
Yeah, and while we have middle schoolers and high schoolers in mind for this series, we do encourage everybody and anybody to come along and learn with us.
This means you. So let's grab our field notebooks, bring along our curiosity about climate solutions, and check out the episode about soil health.
Landfills.
Landfills and soil. Oops, sorry, oh my gosh, about landfills, trash. When you throw something away, it doesn't just disappear. It ends up here, at a landfill. On average, an American generates around 5 pounds of waste each day. And with over 340 million people in the United States, that's a lot of trash. But before it ends up here, it starts here with a decision. Choosing to sort our waste into the proper bins can help us reuse valuable resources and lower the amount of waste that ends up in landfills. But what impact do our landfills have on climate change and the environment? Landfills are a necessary part of how we handle waste, but how we steward them can have a big impact on climate change. We send our waste to the landfill so it can break down. But what exactly does it mean to break down? I'm here to talk to a scientist who does her research right here at this landfill. When we talk about things decomposing and breaking down in the landfill or anywhere, what are they actually breaking down into?
In a landfill, and actually even in our guts, it's all about microorganisms. And so when I say a microorganism, I mean everything from a virus, a bacteria, or archaea, a fungi, and things like that. And they're breaking down the waste to get at those nutrients that they need to grow. So your organic materials, like food waste, for instance, those will break down mostly actually into sugars or other carbon sources. They will eat those first. Things like plastics or metal take a really long time if they ever break down. So in all the different layers of the landfill, you get different microbial processes and different stages of composition that are happening.
So it's like a trash layer cake.
Pretty much. So we kind of break them down into 3 big categories. There's aerobic, and then there's fermentation, and then there's anaerobic. So we have our aerobic decomposers. Those are our fastest ones, and they use oxygen as part of their metabolism. So that breaks down all your organic waste, and they feed the fermenters, which are dominantly bacteria, and then those fermenters feed a lot of the anaerobic microorganisms.
Wow, it is an ecosystem. I don't think of the landfill as being alive, except maybe in a horror movie, so that's kind of cool. So question then, if most things, at least in geological time, do break down eventually, in the end, it doesn't really matter which bin I put my waste in.
It does if you want to prevent pollution or make your landfill more efficient. The landfill is best for materials that really take a long time to break down or don't have another reuse or a purpose. We know that when there's more organic matter, like more food waste in a landfill, those are the materials that really stimulate methane production. And methane is a far more potent greenhouse gas than CO2.
Landfills are the 3rd largest source of methane emissions in the United States, primarily due to the anaerobic decomposition of nutrients from organic matter. However, organic matter is compostable, and composting is an aerobic process that doesn't produce methane. So if we took our compostable things out of landfills in general, that would reduce the methane in landfills and significantly in the environment.
Very much. And that way, the stuff that's ending up in our landfill is truly the stuff that we don't have any other use for or any other process So that way we're minimizing the amount of land use that goes into our landfills.
So how can we make our waste management systems safer and more sustainable? Let's meet up with a member of the Dane County Waste and Renewables team to learn about how this landfill is diverting organic waste to a composting facility.
We talk about composting, but what actually is happening? What does it break down into?
Ooh, that's a great question. So when we talk about composting, composting is the process that makes compost.
Okay.
So compost is the final end product that you get. It's not quite soil, but it's a fertilizer, a soil amendment is kind of what we call it.
Okay.
So we talk through organic resources as a few different waste streams. If you've heard of composting before, you might have heard of your greens and your browns. So nitrogen is your green, those will be your food scraps. Carbons are your browns, so the leaves and the tree branches, the plants that grew your food, and you want a nice ratio of that because just like we want to have a good healthy diet, our compost microbes also need a good healthy diet. Okay, so but once you have your pile for composting, they eat away at all the carbon and nitrogen materials that are in that pile and they break it down, and then once the compost is finished, we'll actually bag it and sell it so that we can use it in our gardens, and it'll be a nice nutrient boost for my plants.
Okay, so waste isn't necessarily always waste.
Yeah.
It's whether you're wasting it.
Exactly. So we can turn that waste into resources to then put back into our environment and grow more plants.
So how does the organic waste that ends up here get diverted from going through a landfill instead?
Yeah, so first we have to work with people before it gets to the landfill. So we work with residents through our Food Scrap Stop program, where they can drop off food scraps that they collect at home, and then we bring them here and doesn't make its way to the landfill.
Did you know that over a third of our landfill waste is organic matter that could be composted instead? This is organic waste, but how do you compost it? Let's find out. Hey, Sam.
Hey.
So how does this food scrap program work, and what do I do with this?
Yeah, it's super easy to use. There's food scrap stops across Dane County.
Okay.
It's a program run by the Dane County Waste and Renewables. These are composting bins. They're community compost bins, so anyone in Dane County can use them. So there's a lock. After you fill out a short 6-question survey on their website, you get the combination. You show up to your chosen location, unlock it, open it up, drop your food scrap, lock it back up. There you go.
That is super easy.
Yes, it is.
So what is the food scrap program, and how did you get involved with it?
I was a youth representative on the Dane County Public Works and Transportation Committee.
Wow.
And so one of the things that we had to deal with often was community concern about expanding landfills, because whenever those landfills expand, it does take up public lands that would otherwise be used for something else. And so making sure that landfills aren't expanding as much is a huge priority, and composting played a huge role in that, because they're keeping all those food scraps that would otherwise be going into the landfill right here. And honestly, the community totally knocked it out the park. In the first 2 months, there were over 1,000 people that signed up, and now and it's not just this location; it's really all the locations. They're all receiving tons of resident food scraps.
Oh, that's awesome. One of the best ways to get involved in sustainable waste management is to educate yourself, your family, and your friends about the right way to dispose of waste, or find ways to minimize the amount of waste you produce. Here are some ideas. Find creative ways to reuse your old stuff and make it new, or donate items that other people might want instead of just throwing them away. Use reusable products or recyclable alternatives instead of single-use items. And start composting at home. If you want to scale up your efforts, reach out to local restaurants and see if they'll switch their carry-out containers to recyclable or compostable ones. Petition your school to start a composting program with the food scraps left over from lunch. Or learn about the practices at your local landfill and become an advocate for additional sustainable practices in your community. There are lots of ways to limit your waste production, so don't get down in the dumps. Find ways to reduce the amount of trash you make each day, reuse valuable resources, and recycle materials to give them new life. After all, waste is just resources put in the wrong places.
Okay, mate! Aluminum cans, put them in the recycle.
In the recycling!
It'll help the earth.
Yeah, we can all recycle, right? Awesome!
I loved that kid. I know, he was the best.
He was so prepared.
He was very prepared
for our shoot. I am really excited to tell you everything I learned about trash. I know that's a question you're supposed to ask me, but this is one of my favorite episodes, and my family can attest to this. I would not shut up about the things I learned about the landfill after shooting this episode. And one of my favorite, like, disturbing but also good news facts for climate change is that, so we're in Wisconsin, right? Most of us are in Wisconsin. We're in Wisconsin. And we have a lot of cows. And, like, famously, methane comes from farts, right? And we have a lot of cows that do that in Wisconsin. But it turns out that methane, actually the largest producer is the landfill. And also this is a resource that we can harvest. So, like, we can actually harvest farts. Because garbage farts too, not just cows. But in all seriousness, I had to bring my fart machine. It's reusable, by the way, so it's very eco-friendly. Methane is like a resource we can use, and landfills all over the place are just pumping it out. And we also don't even need to create it because it only comes from the breakdown of these natural fibers and materials. And if we could just compost those, then it wouldn't even be there. So it's like a major pollutant in the atmosphere that not only do we not need to make, and there's like easy ways of stopping making it, but then we can use it too while we're still making it.
Yeah, it really just depends on like the type of landfill stream.
Yeah, like how you
waste stream or.
Like where you divert your waste, like and putting it in the correct.
Yeah, thank you.
Correct bins.
So it's like you can either prevent the methane from being produced by composting a lot of the organic waste, or if you don't have a composting facility, it's like you can harvest that methane and use it as biogas, which didn't make it in the episode, but maybe if you go to our website, you can see our video extra on biogas. But that is a really cool thing, and Erica told us all about how. Biogas could we could like essentially power the country on trash if we harvested all of the methane that is being produced by landfills, which is such a cool fact. Like, I absolutely loved our interview with Erica because it was so informative and I learned so much. And it didn't smell as bad as you would think it would at a landfill. It actually was pretty pleasant.
It was windy that day, but
that
you
too.
know, still, we came prepared for it to smell terrible. What, Kylie, has this changed your approach to like more conscientious consumerism? Like, obviously we make waste because we also consume stuff. So, you know, diverting the stream before it happens?
Yeah, so I think something that I do and I think that people can do that's pretty easy of a shift is like maybe replacing some of the things in your home with reusable things. So instead of using like single-use sandwich bags, maybe you get like a little glass container for your sandwich that you can bring in a lunchbox to school or work. And you can limit the amount of waste you're making each day by using reusables, or like a reusable water bottle instead of buying a water bottle every day. Things like that can really limit your single-use plastics and your daily waste. And then on top of that, you can do some not new practices, but maybe new to you. So start doing practices like composting for the waste that you do produce. So like when you are creating that waste, you have somewhere it can go that is not going to pollute the environment.
Yes, and because we're all going to create waste. It's part of the
inevitable.
cycle. Yeah, we all do it, just like this. We're coming to you live from the studio, so we'd love to hear from you. If you want to ask questions or tell us how you use less wasteful products in your life. But, you know, to make these episodes, we don't stay here in our little picnic scene in the studio. We get to go out in the fields.
Yeah, we travel all around the state to talk with change makers around the state of Wisconsin and learn about like the knowledge, the research, the ideas, and the actions that they're taking to actively mitigate and adapt to climate change impacts in their communities.
So let's dig a little deeper, and this time we actually are going to show the soil health episode, so check it out.
You know what's cool about trees? They breathe in what we breathe out, and we breathe in what they breathe out. It's a cycle, part of the carbon cycle, to be exact. But there's so much more to the carbon cycle than just people, plants, and animals. The sun plays a role, the ocean is involved, and the soil beneath your feet is a huge factor. The carbon cycle affects the atmosphere, the weather, and the climate. When the carbon cycle is balanced, ecosystems run smoothly. But how does an imbalanced carbon cycle impact the environment? Ecosystems function almost like a machine. Everything has its role, and if something deviates from its role, the whole system is impacted. Maybe that's why it's called an ecosystem. Let's meet up with an ecosystem scientist to learn more about carbon's role in an ecosystem. So when did carbon start to become like a problem?
It was about the Industrial Revolution, whenever a whole lot of carbon that had been built up in fossil fuels over millions of years started to be burned to fuel society. So we started burning things like coal and oil and natural gas. And when we do that, we're releasing a whole lot of carbon that's been stored for millions of years into the atmosphere all at once. And that big pulse of carbon is the primary driver of climate change today. So now when we think about what's driving the increase in carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, a source of carbon dioxide will be something that's causing the amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere to go up.
Okay.
So for example, burning those fossil fuels. A carbon sink would be something like a growing plant. So as the plant is growing, it's sequestering carbon that used to be in the atmosphere and is now, for the time being, tied up in that plant. So a sink is drawing carbon down, a source is putting carbon up.
A carbon sink is a large reservoir that absorbs more carbon from the atmosphere than it releases. Some examples of carbon sinks are oceans, forests, and soils. CO2 dissolves directly into seawater, and ocean currents distribute it and store it in deeper waters. Forests absorb carbon from the atmosphere through photosynthesis. The trees then use this carbon to grow, so it's stored in the trunk, branches, leaves, and roots. And forests help store carbon in the soils too. Carbon is released into the soil through plant roots, where it's then stored. Another way carbon enters the soil is through the decomposition of organic matter, such as plants and animals. These carbon sinks work together to absorb carbon from the atmosphere and store it. But what happens when one carbon sink is storing too much and another isn't storing enough?
We've been a big driver of release of carbon from these long-term pools through human activities. We cut down a lot of trees, we disturb a lot of soils, so the oceans are taking up a lot of excess carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, which is good. It means it's not in the atmosphere causing climate change, but it also leads to more acidic seawater, threatening a lot of ocean life.
Human practices have had a major impact on the carbon cycle due to excessive carbon emissions, making the cycle unbalanced. Now, there's too much carbon in the atmosphere and in our oceans, but not enough carbon being stored in other sinks, like forests and soils. So what can we do to help rebalance the carbon cycle?
So there's an ecological principle that says that the more diverse our ecosystems are, they should be more effective at capturing energy from the sun and thereby pull some of that carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere and help mitigate some of the impacts of climate change.
Okay.
So behind us, we see one example of what that can look like. This is a silvopasture. It's grazed by sheep.
What's silvopasture?
Silvo, Latin for tree. So silvopasture is a tree pasture. The trees are chestnuts, so the trees both produce something that we can eat, and they also provide shade for the sheep. We can't change what has happened in the last 150 years, so now we're hoping to implement different types of ag practices, produce our food a little bit differently. And if we get it right, the soil health that we've lost, we can actually start to regain.
Let's talk to Daniel Hayden, a citizen of the Comanche Nation, who can tell us about indigenous farming practices that have been climate smart and sustainable for generations. Hey Daniel, I have so many questions for you. What's the biggest difference between indigenous farming practices and modern farming practices?
So indigenous farming practices in North America were very different from our modern Western agricultural systems, predominantly because of the lack of tillage. Practices like tillage are very destructive and degrading to the environment long term. And there's so much that time and history has gone into the creation of soil, and we've seen such a rapid degradation of that through farming practices. What makes indigenous farming practices more sustainable, I think, is the legacy of how indigenous people were listening to the land. A lot of indigenous culture is based in land and in the environment.
What's an example of an indigenous farming practice?
The Three Sisters has been this genius idea that, has developed for centuries through time and, still practiced now, obviously.
Wait.
I think
What are the Three Sisters?
corn, beans, and squash. So the Three Sisters specifically were grown together on a mound of soil. Each crop sort of plays their own functional purpose. So corn grows really tall. And because of that, beans, the other sister, are able to grow up the corn, and also below ground, they're adding soil nutrients. Squash, the big leaves of squash typically are nice for shading out weeds. Practices like the Three Sisters, for example, have been shown to be more productive in some cases than just growing corn, beans, and squash by themselves. These resilient systems are ones that can maintain themselves while being adaptive to things like climate change.
By adapting our farming practices to work with the landscape rather than attempting to alter the landscape, we can cultivate environments that are beneficial to the crops, soil, and people. So can you tell me, what kind of farm do you work on here?
It's a grass-fed beef farm, so we raise our grass-fed beef herd here through rotational grazing, and then we also have some sheep that we raise alongside them.
You talked about rotational grazing. What does that actually mean?
We move the cattle every single day in the summer. We use a polywire and a reel to move them, so they'll get a new area of pasture each day. So we need that soil to be healthy because it builds up the diversity of our plants and makes sure that our cattle are getting all their needed nutrients from our pastures. We need to do our job as not only producers but consumers as well to maintain that healthy soil and continue to improve it.
How can you tell the difference between healthy and unhealthy soil?
So our soil is healthy, and I can tell that because there's no erosion. If you look at the soil, there's a lot of organic matter on the top, which shows us that their manure and everything is going back into the soil and it's not running off into our waterways. Also, we can see lots of different variety of grasses, which is important to us, and that shows us that there's different root structures in the grass. On our farm, there's always something in the soil, which is holding that soil down and keeping that root structure in the ground, which is gonna really sequester that carbon and hold in those nutrients that are otherwise getting lost on these other farms. And that would be really helpful to building up our soil health.
They agree.
Yeah.
Improving the health of our soils can seem like a daunting task. I mean, we're literally talking about changing the ground beneath our feet. But there are so many ways for us to get involved in protecting soils. A great place to start is by looking at the foods you eat and knowing where they came from. Support farms that are using sustainable practices like agroforestry, rotational grazing, and organic methods. If you want a more direct approach, you can plant your own carbon sequestering plants at home or in your community. If you have a garden plot, try planting crops that maintain their root system and will grow back next year. And try companion planting for a bountiful harvest that's good for the soil. All of these are great ways to contribute to improving soil health in your community. So now, each time you prepare your dinner plate or relax under the shade of a tree, you know that you helped store more carbon in the soil where it belongs. Oh, hi there. That's how it felt. I really can't do that, okay? Oh, I didn't see you there. Is that the end? We learned a lot about soil in that episode.
Yes, we did. So what's something that you didn't know about soil before this episode?
Well, it isn't something you think about all the time. Because like you were saying earlier, like it's just there. It's just the dirt.
It's just the ground beneath your feet. You don't really think about it.
No, but it was very interesting to think of it like kind of how we think about the water cycle. And now I think many of us are familiar with the idea of the water moving through the ecosystem, moving through the environment. And to think of kind of dirt as part of that soil, and like alive. I did not think about the soil as alive. But especially like after seeing the soil core and like the layers and what those layers can mean of the soil, kind of like how trees, and shout out, we're going to do an episode that has some stuff to do with tree rings, but like tree rings can tell a story of what the tree has grown through, how the soil layers can tell a story of what the soil has gone through. And so those were things I'd never thought about before in terms of soil health. Like, what even is that term? I never would have thought of that before. So this is full of a lot of weird new things that I'm very excited to learn about.
Yeah, and you mentioned the soil core. The soil core did not actually make it into the episode, but if you're interested in learning about soil cores and what they mean, check out our video extra on Thursday. Those will be available to see on the website. But yeah, so soil core is really cool because we got to see the difference in layers, but more importantly, I think what was cool about it is that we didn't see a lot of difference in the layers, which is not normal, and that's because of tillage and the lack of sustainable farming practices that have been used in the last couple, like 100 years or so.
But it is a very good way of tracking like what's going to happen next too. So I think something we really try to focus on in field notes is the positivity. And obviously this topic can be kind of overwhelming and scary, climate change. But there are a lot of people doing a lot of really cool creative things in all kinds of ways. And I really particularly love this episode because we got to visit Riley and the farm and like this whole very Wisconsin thing. I guess maybe the theme for this premiere is cows, because we saw cows again. But then also like, you know, the science area of that and how that affects all of our food sources. And these can be very positive, creative things that people can relate to more directly. So what stood out to you, Kylie, in like the differences in farming practices from making this episode?
Yeah, I think a lot of us, when we think about farming today, a lot of like the processes you're thinking of are probably like industrial farming, and it might be like monocropping. So it's like you're driving down a road in Wisconsin and you see just cornfields everywhere. So that's a monocrop. And that's not something you would see naturally. You don't see one species kind of taking over and growing in a space without anything else there. And it's not natural, and it's not necessarily good for the ecosystem either. So it's like one of those like older not traditional, but industrial farming practices that kind of impacts the soil. And then you see like Daniel Hayden was telling us, and Riley Nelson were telling us about these sustainable farming practices and indigenous farming practices, that the difference is kind of like they use natural ecosystem processes to grow or manage their food crops. So it's kind of cool to me to do this like unlearning of like old ways.
Yeah, unlearning.
And like relearning the ways things were traditionally done, and a way that like we can really utilize our ecosystems and get to know how an ecosystem should function and like use that biodiversity to grow our food.
Yeah, just like going with the flow with nature often works really well. But I also, before this episode, I had a lot of questions about like how could we do some of these more traditional indigenous farming methods in a mass scale, because obviously we have to feed a lot of people right now. And so kind of learning the ways that scientists and people in the field, no pun intended, are figuring out how to do this on a mass scale is very exciting. We can do that.
Well, yeah, and that's what like the Savannah Institute is doing. Is like they're testing all these different ways that we can incorporate sustainable farming practices into large-scale farming, and they're like finding ways to do that. So it's like cool to see how you can have multiple types of farming too. It's like not just like having a food crop grown, but it's like with the silvopasture, it's like you have chestnut trees growing and that's a food crop, but then underneath it's like you also have like sheep grazing that, and like you can use like their wool for like clothing. And like that's like a really cool concept to like have two like pros in one spot. So it's like you're getting double the usage out of that land.
Yeah. Maybe that's a big takeaway from the show too. Like there are a lot of creative ways of doing more than one thing at once. And you don't have to be perfect. You can just start with one small thing. That is a wrap on today's premiere, but it's not a wrap on Field Notes on Climate. In fact, we have a bunch more episodes from season 1, which are available online on pbswisconsineducation.org. And also, we're continuing to make more episodes for season 2 already.
Yeah, so we want to hear from you. Let us know what you want to see in season 2, and let us know what you think of episodes in season 1. So yeah, thanks so much for joining us.
This has been so fun. You let me live the dream of having my fart machine on live television. So thank you, bye.